Kendrick Lamar just moved another chess piece, and by the time you finish this video, you're going to look at this entire Drake situation completely differently than you did 5 minutes ago. In fact, what I am about to break down for you might be the single most damning 72-hour stretch that Drake's camp has ever endured in public, and Kendrick Lamar did not even have to say a word for it to land. That is a promise, not a tease, and the receipts are already sitting on the table. Before we get into any of it, I hope every single one of you is doing great, because for the walking migraines we are about to break down today, well, everybody else deserves a soft opener. So happy weekend, happy Sunday, happy whatever day this lands on for you, and let's get straight into what might be the wildest little pocket of hip-hop news I have covered in weeks. Because Drake fans, and I am using that phrase generously, literally drove to Kendrick Lamar's house in Los Angeles this week. They drove to Kendrick Lamar's house. They banged on the door. They pressed the doorbell. They pretended to be DoorDash. They pretended to be a Hollywood Fix reporter. They filmed all of it. And in the same 72-hour window, a legendary Los Angeles radio DJ named DJ Carisma sat down on a podcast and calmly explained that for the last 10 years of her professional career, she has been forced to spin Drake records 5 to 6 times an hour, every single hour she is on air, whether or not there is hotter music in the city. And then, just to round out the trifecta, YG walked into the Verzuz stage against the Game and beat him 19 rounds to 3, while Drizzy Deacons on the timeline melted down because YG refused to answer Drake questions in an interview about YG's own event. That is 1 week. 1 week. And every single strand of it points back to the same story. 3 headlines, 3 different corners of the culture, 1 central defendant. When that kind of coincidence lands in the same news cycle, it is not a coincidence anymore. It is a pattern with a heartbeat, and the heartbeat is beating loud enough now that even the casual observer can hear it. Which is that the Drizzy machine is bigger than anyone wants to admit, and the mask has slid off in public. This is not a rumor. This is not a hot take. This is not a Reddit thread. This is 3 separate, verifiable, documented events landing on the same weekend and telling the exact same story from 3 different angles. So look, before I start the tape rolling, do me the tiny favor of hitting that like button. I want every one of you standing in the same room with me on this one, because there are people online right now trying to gaslight this entire fan base into pretending none of what I am about to show you actually happened. And while you're at it, subscribe if you haven't already, because we are on a real run over here, and I promise the next 10 minutes are worth the price of admission. Alright, so let's start with the house. Los Angeles this week. A group of streamers who described themselves as, and I quote, part of the streaming group, decided that the funniest use of their afternoon would be to caravan over to Kendrick Lamar's alleged mansion, film themselves at the front door, and try to bait Kendrick Lamar into coming outside. Now, look, I have been in the content space long enough to know that a certain kind of person will do absolutely anything for a clip. I get it. I truly do. But there is a line between chasing a clip and pulling up on somebody's home, and these action figure fans smoked right past that line without ever tapping the brakes. The video opens with one of them yelling, and I am paraphrasing here, that they are about to go to Kendrick Lamar's house first. Real. Great planning. Great forethought. Truly the choir of grown children announcing their felony out loud before they even parked the car. And then it gets worse. They ring the bell. They stand on the porch. They start yelling into the doorbell camera pretending to be a DoorDash driver. They pretend to be delivery. They pretend to be a fan. They lean into the little camera like it is a stage. And the entire time, one of them is filming from the sidewalk. Now, I want you to understand what these guys apparently forgot. Kendrick Lamar is a blockbuster global superstar. Kendrick Lamar has a Pulitzer. Kendrick Lamar headlined the biggest Super Bowl halftime show in modern history. Every square inch of that neighborhood is on camera. Every single house on that block has a ring, a nest, a doorbell cam, probably a full security suite. Your license plate got scanned before you finished parking. Your faces are on record from 4 different angles before you ever knocked. And you are announcing on tape that you were sent by Aubrey. Sent by Aubrey. That is what these clowns actually said into the camera. I am not making this up. Real talk, if there were a hall of fame for choosing the worst possible thing to say out loud on a stranger's porch, that sentence would be enshrined in bronze. And here is what nobody wants to admit. This is not the first time. Anybody who has been paying attention to this culture for longer than 15 minutes remembers the Joe Budden incident from years ago, when a very similar group of people showed up to his house pulling a very similar stunt. And Joe Budden came out of that house with a rock in his hand and a wife beater that had seen better decades, and chased them down the driveway like it was a Compton block party. Same energy. Same fan base. Same script. And that was a warning. That was the culture telling this specific slice of the internet, do not do this. Do not show up on people's homes for clout. And here we are, half a decade later, with the exact same play running on the exact same field, this time aimed at Kendrick Lamar. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And patterns matter. Because let's be honest about what could have happened. Kendrick Lamar has a family. Kendrick Lamar has children. Kendrick Lamar's mother could have been inside that house. Kendrick Lamar's fiancé could have been inside that house. Kendrick Lamar's security team could have been inside that house. And these boys pulled up in a car at night-adjacent hours, banging on the door, filming their faces, joking about being sent by Aubrey, and then, when a security vehicle rolled up, they started nervously joking about getting 10 bullets in their back. That is what one of them literally said. 10 bullets in the back. That is not a joke. That is a person who has never once in their life experienced consequences, understanding, for the first time, that consequences might actually exist. And when the security guard finally stepped out of the vehicle, one of them said, and I am quoting this verbatim from the tape, "Damn, you're big as hell." And then, and this is the part that nearly took me out, one of them turned to the biggest guy in their own group and said, "Bro, you're fat as hell too. We saw you running just now." Because when the moment actually came, and it was real, and the security guard was standing there, the loudest one in the group turned into the smallest. That is what these people are. Every single time. When there is a doorbell between them and the man they are yelling at, they are gladiators. When there is a security guard 6 feet away and no doorbell between them and reality, they Naruto run in the slowest, saddest jog you have ever seen. And they were filming all of it. They filmed themselves running. They filmed themselves quivering. They filmed themselves joking about being smoked, on tape, out of their own mouths, saying Aubrey sent them. If somebody wanted to build a case against this fan base just handed them the deposition themselves. Voluntarily. On the record. In 4K. Kendrick Lamar's lawyers did not have to do a single thing. These guys uploaded the entire evidence package to the internet themselves. Timestamped. Geotagged. Facially identifiable. Verbally confessed motive on the audio track. If a criminology professor wanted a textbook example of how not to commit a crime, this footage would be chapter 1. And these are the people who spend their nights online telling Kendrick Lamar fans they are the nerds. Read that sentence back to yourself and let it sit for a second. And listen, I want to be careful here, because I know some folks are going to jump out of a window if I even float this as a theory. But when a group of streamers with a documented history of proximity to Drake's camp, and one of whom, and we all know who, has literally been on live stream with Drake dozens of times, decides to caravan to Kendrick Lamar's house and film themselves saying Aubrey sent them, at minimum, at the absolute minimum, that is a conversation worth having. I am not saying Drake called them. I am not saying Drake dispatched them. I am saying that when you build an ecosystem of Drizzy Deacons who worship the ground you walk on and treat your Instagram likes as a religious experience, you do not get to be surprised when they take it upon themselves to do the thing they think will earn them a shout-out. That is what fandom warfare looks like now. That is what the internet has done to a subset of these grown adults. They are not fans. They are foot soldiers. And they are volunteering. So the comments come rolling in and, honestly, some of them are gold. One person wrote that Drake sent them, and now this will be used against them, and, honestly, that is exactly what is going to happen. Because Kendrick Lamar has an entire legal team, and a security team, and a paper trail, and these boys just gift-wrapped an incident report and mailed it to his lawyer. Another person wrote that this is what happens when your artist attracts a younger fan base, and it is not even that. It is what happens when an artist's fan base is fed a steady diet of parasocial validation and told, day in and day out, that their favorite rapper is a victim of a global conspiracy. When you feed people that story for 2 years straight, some of them are going to start acting like they're on a holy mission. And the holy mission ends with them jogging away from a security vehicle in Los Angeles trying not to cry on camera. Another comment I saw, and this one really landed for me, said that if these boys had gotten hurt, everyone would have blamed Kendrick Lamar's people for taking it too far, when the actual truth is that if you show up on somebody's home banging on the door, you have already taken it too far. Full stop. Period. You do not get to declare yourself the victim after you kick down the fence. And another commenter pointed out something I want you to sit with for a second. They wrote, "These are the shooters Drake is always talking about. These are the shooters. This is the ground army. This is the muscle. This is what has been getting hyped for 2 years as Drake's silent, dangerous, hidden network. And when you actually put a camera on them, they are terrified of a doorbell. The mask has slid off. Now let's pivot, because this is where the story gets even wilder and the industrial layer starts to come into focus. Because on the same weekend that the Drizzy Deacons were driving to Kendrick Lamar's front door for a TikTok, veteran Los Angeles radio DJ Carisma sat down on a podcast, and she did something that a lot of people in her position never do. She told the truth. Out loud. On tape. On record. And what she said is going to reframe every argument the OVO cheerleaders have been making for the last decade. Because DJ Carisma said, and again, I am quoting directly from the tape, that for the last 10 years of her professional radio career at one of the biggest stations in the country, she has been required to play Drake records 5 to 6 times an hour. Every hour, every shift. Not because she wanted to. Not because the crowd was requesting it. Not because there was a listener demand. But because there is a mandatory playlist, and Drake is at the top of that mandatory playlist, and if she deviates, she is looking at professional consequences up to and including termination. Now let me put that in context for you, because I do not think people fully understand how radio works. Commercial radio is not a free-form playground. It is a locked ecosystem. Music directors and program directors run the boards with military discipline. There is a rotation sheet. There is a play count. There is a delivery matrix. And the only real freedom a DJ has is in the late-night specialty slots, which by definition have the smallest audiences. So if you are Carisma and you are on the day shift, in a city as musically rich as Los Angeles, in an era where new artists are begging for one spin on commercial radio, you are being told, effectively, that 6 of your slots per hour are spoken for before you even walk into the booth. 6 of them. Now do the math with me. An hour of radio is 60 minutes. Subtract the ads. Subtract the commercial breaks. Subtract the promos. Subtract the DJ talk breaks. Subtract the phone calls. Subtract the traffic. What you have left, honestly, is maybe 25 to 30 minutes of actual music, and 6 of those slots are already taken by one artist. 6. That means there are, at best, 4 to 5 other slots per hour available for every other artist in the country, in the world. That is a monopoly. That is not a rotation. That is a monopoly. And it has been the operational reality of commercial radio in this country for a full decade. And what is the recurring narrative that the owl cult has been screaming for the last 2 years? That Drake gets no radio support. That Drake is being frozen out. That Drake is fighting the system. That Drake is a martyr. Come on now. Come on. This man has had 6 per hour guaranteed spins in the biggest radio market on the West Coast for a decade. A decade. That is not being frozen out. That is being carried. That is being propped. That is being fed with a diamond-studded spoon. And the wildest part is that this is not even DJ Carisma's opinion. This is her operational reality. She is not editorializing. She is describing her job. And in describing her job, she has accidentally, or maybe intentionally, dismantled one of the central lies of the last 5 years of Drake discourse. Meanwhile, Kendrick Lamar, for the record, has never once needed a mandatory playlist to move the culture. Kendrick Lamar moves it with a single verse. Kendrick Lamar moves it with a single Instagram post. Kendrick Lamar moves it with silence. There is no mandatory Kendrick Lamar rotation sheet floating around a program director's desk. There does not need to be. Kendrick Lamar has never once required an industrial subsidy to bend a room to his attention, and that is the fundamental gap between the two catalogs that this whole discourse has been dodging for a decade. Because if a DJ of her stature, in a market of that size, is being handed a mandatory play sheet with Drake plastered across it 6 times an hour, imagine what that looks like across every major market in the country. Imagine what that looks like in New York, in Atlanta, in Houston, in Miami, in Chicago. Multiply that by every commercial station in every major market for 10 years, and you are looking at a promotional infrastructure that no independent artist could ever hope to compete with. That is not the shape of an artist being punished by the industry. That is the shape of an artist being subsidized by the industry. And here is the darker layer under it. Carisma also said that she wanted to play other artists. She wanted to play YG. She wanted to play the hot local record. She wanted to reflect what her city was actually loving. And she was told no. That is the industry killing city culture from the top down. That is the industry telling a whole generation of Los Angeles artists that they can be the hottest thing in their own zip code and still get frozen out of their own radio dial because 6 slots per hour, every hour, are reserved for one Canadian artist. That is not a level playing field. That is not organic. That is not culture. That is a payroll decision being spun as a taste decision. And when you understand that, the last decade of Drake numbers starts to look very, very different. So now step back and connect the dots. On one side of the map, you have Drizzy Deacons showing up on Kendrick Lamar's front porch pretending to be DoorDash. On the other side of the map, you have a legendary radio DJ confessing that the entire commercial airspace has been reserved for the same artist for a decade. In the middle, you have YG walking onto a Verzuz stage against the Game, a founding titan of West Coast rap, and beating him 19-3. Which brings me to the third story, and it is the perfect punctuation mark on all of this. Because YG went into that Verzuz as, and I am being generous here, a supreme underdog. The Game has one of the deepest catalogs in West Coast history. The Game has hit after hit after hit. The Game came into that arena as the presumed champion. And YG walked in, played hit after hit after hit himself, and turned the whole room into a West Coast block party. 19-3. 19-2-3. And listen, I am not going to pretend this was a rigged event. It was not. The crowd voted. The tally was public. And the tally said that YG's catalog, when actually put on a level playing field with no mandatory playlists, no promotional machine, no industry subsidies, no coordinated marketing push, just song against song in a room with real people, won by a landslide. Because that is what happens when the machine gets turned off for one night and the music has to speak for itself. No radio quota. No promotional push. No trend-boosted stream count. No coordinated fandom rollout. Just the songs in a room with real ears and a real vote. And on that particular night, in that particular room, on that particular scoreboard, the machine lost. And by the way, the Game showing up in that dingy, oversized white beater, sweating through a Jerry curl, sipping straight from a bottle of Don Julio like it was Gatorade. Please, somebody, please, take that bottle away from him next time. I am not saying it in a mean way. I am saying it as a friend. There is a time to celebrate and there is a time to lock in, and when you have that many eyeballs on you, that particular night was a lock-in night. But hey, everybody looked like they were having a good time. Both artists dropped a record together the day before. There was no beef. It was Compton and Compton and Compton and Compton, and honestly, watching the whole West Coast unify on one stage was one of the coolest things this year has given us. But then the internet did what the internet does, and specifically the Drizzy Deacons did what they always do, which is they turned YG's night into a Drake conversation. Because after the Verzuz, YG sat down for an interview, and the interviewer, doing his job, started asking YG about Drake. And YG, to his credit, calmly and repeatedly declined to make his night about somebody else. He said, and I love this, that different is intentional. He said he has a good heart, and he is not known for doing anything weird, and he is just going to keep being himself. And the interviewer kept pushing and pushing and pushing. Drake questions. Drake questions. More Drake questions. And finally YG said, and I am paraphrasing here, that if the interviewer wanted a Drake press conference, he should go find one, because this was not it. And then he essentially told the man that he was going to walk out if the Drake questions kept coming. And the timeline lost its mind. The owl cult started calling YG bitter, calling him disloyal, calling him ungrateful, calling him a hater. Now think about that for 1 second, and I want you to really think about it, because this is the whole game right here. Imagine, and I mean really imagine, if Drake was doing an interview about his own album, and every single question the reporter asked was about Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick Lamar. Non-stop. Would the Drizzy Deacons celebrate that reporter as a truth teller? Would they defend the reporter as a journalist just doing his job? Absolutely not. They would light the entire internet on fire. They would call for the reporter to be blacklisted. They would demand an apology. They would clip the reporter's face across every timeline for a week. But when the shoe is on the other foot, and it is YG telling a reporter to leave him alone about Drake, suddenly YG is the villain. That is not a fandom. That is a religion with really bad theology. A religion where the God is a Toronto artist, the scripture is a marketing calendar, and the tithe is your last shred of critical thinking. And every religion that operates on that model eventually runs into the same problem, which is that the congregation eventually notices the collection plate is only ever going in one direction. And this is where the whole picture snaps into focus, because every strand of this week's news is telling the exact same story from 3 different angles. The Drizzy Deacons pulling up to Kendrick Lamar's house tells you that the fanbase has been radicalized into believing that harassment is a form of worship. DJ Carisma telling the truth about the mandatory playlist tells you that the numbers everyone has been screaming about for a decade were never organic. And YG being interrogated about Drake at YG's own event tells you that the machine cannot even let a rival artist have a single night of West Coast celebration without trying to bend the conversation back toward itself. That is not confidence. That is desperation. That is what desperation looks like when it is dressed up in a chain and a black owl. Now, before I go any further, I want to acknowledge something. Because I know somebody is going to say, well, EQ, you sound like a hater. You sound biased. You have Kendrick fatigue in reverse. And I want to be really clear about this. I do not hate Drake. I have never hated Drake. I have plenty of Drake songs in my personal rotation from the 2011 to 2018 window. I think the man is talented. I think he built a real career. I think he had an incredible run. What I do not respect is the machinery that has been built around that career, and I do not respect the fanbase that has been trained to defend that machinery like it is a family member. Those are 2 different things. You can love an artist and still be honest about the ecosystem that props them up. In fact, if you actually love the artist, you owe them that honesty. Because the alternative is what we are watching right now. The alternative is a fanbase that believes their favorite rapper is being persecuted by the world when in reality, he is being subsidized by the world. And that gap between belief and reality is what is turning them into the kind of person who drives to a stranger's house at night and knocks on the door pretending to be delivery. That is what unchecked worship does. It rots the worshiper. So now, with all 3 stories on the table, let me tell you where I think this whole thing is actually going. Because you can already feel it in the atmosphere. You can feel it in the way the Verzuz crowd voted. You can feel it in the way Carisma finally said out loud what a lot of DJs have been quietly saying in private for years. You can feel it in the way even Drake's most loyal supporters are starting to critique Iceman in the comments, saying they are tired, saying they want to hear something different, saying the album did not hit the way the last one did. This is the moment where a fanbase starts to crack. Not from outside pressure. From inside fatigue. And that fatigue is a very, very hard thing to reverse. Because a Drake fatigue admission from a legendary radio DJ is not just a personal opinion. It is a leading indicator. When the person whose literal job it is to spin the record starts telling the world, on tape, that she is tired of spinning the record, that is the market talking to you. That is the market telling you that the well is running dry. And when the market starts talking, the labels start listening. And when the labels start listening, the subsidies start shifting. And when the subsidies start shifting, the numbers start telling the truth. And the truth, unshielded by promotional infrastructure, is a very different picture than the one that has been marketed to us for the last decade. Meanwhile, on the other end of the ledger, Kendrick Lamar has not dropped a new full-length studio project in months, has not been on a full press run in months, has not made himself a constant fixture in the timeline, and is still the most quoted, most dissected, most respected artist in the culture. That is the difference between a career built on the art and a career built on the machine. When you turn the machine off, one of them keeps working and one of them stops. That is not opinion. That is math. And every day that passes without a new Kendrick Lamar project only proves the math further, because every conversation, every controversy, every interview cycle keeps circling back to a man who has been silent for months. Kendrick Lamar is louder in silence than most artists are with a full press run. You want to know what real dominance looks like? Real dominance is when you can shut your mouth for 2 years and the entire genre still cannot stop discussing you. That is what Kendrick Lamar is right now. That is where Kendrick Lamar is standing. And the Drizzy Deacons showing up at his house at night, banging on his door, filming themselves, pretending to be DoorDash, is not a demonstration of Drake's strength. It is a confession of Drake's weakness. Because strong artists do not need their fans to drive to their rival's home. Strong artists do not need 6-per-hour guaranteed radio spins for a decade. Strong artists do not need to intercept every Verzuz interview with a redirect toward themselves. Strong artists let the work do the talking. And when the work is not doing the talking, when the work is not landing the way it used to, the machine has to do the talking instead. And that is exactly what we have been watching for the last 2 years. The machine talking. The machine explaining. The machine defending. The machine driving to a house in Los Angeles at night with a phone camera. And here is the piece I want you to walk away with, because this is the part that ties every strand of this week's story into one clean sentence. The Drizzy machine is not a music career anymore. It is a maintenance operation. It is a non-stop, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week logistics project designed to keep a very specific narrative alive. Play the records 6 times an hour. Send the fans to the front doors. Hijack the interviews. Flood the timeline. Buy the trending topic. Pay for the placement. Reserve the slots. Push the streams. Loop it, loop it, loop it. That is not organic. That is not culture. That is not art. That is a supply chain wearing a hoodie. And every single time somebody like DJ Carisma tells the truth, the supply chain gets a little more visible. Every single time somebody like YG refuses to bend his knight toward the machine, the supply chain gets a little more brittle. Every single time a group of Drizzy Deacons pulls up to a house pretending to be delivery, the supply chain gets a little more embarrassing. And every single time Kendrick Lamar drops one new bar, one new interview, one new syllable, the supply chain has to work overtime just to keep up with him. Kendrick Lamar can breathe on a track and it becomes a week-long news cycle. Kendrick Lamar can post one grainy photo and it becomes a month-long think piece. That is what real cultural gravity feels like. It is not something you can buy, rent, subsidize, or manufacture. You either have it or you do not, and Kendrick Lamar has more of it right now than any rapper alive, which is precisely why the machine is working this hard, this publicly, to bury the fact. That is exhausting. That is unsustainable. And the people running the machine know it. Which is why the fans, the ground level, the front line, is being asked to do more and more of the promotional heavy lifting themselves. Show up to the house. Post the takes. Attack the creators. Harass the DJs. Because when the machine at the top is tired, the machine at the bottom has to run faster, and the machine at the bottom is being run by people who genuinely believe they are fighting for the soul of hip-hop, when in reality they are fighting for the market cap of a corporation. That is the tragedy. That is the actual, real, honest-to-God tragedy of this whole moment. These young men driving to Kendrick Lamar's house are not fighting for their culture. They are unpaid interns for a promotional department they have never met. And when they get arrested one day, and I do not say that lightly, But when this pattern eventually finds the wrong doorstep and it goes very badly, the machine will not send a lawyer. The machine will not send a check. The machine will not send a phone call. The machine will delete the tweets, disable the accounts, wipe the DMs, and pretend it never knew them. That is how these things always end. And the Joe Budden incident from years ago should have been the first warning. And every warning since should have been the last warning. But nobody is listening because the sugar rush of a Drake like on Instagram is stronger than the memory of history. Savor the sugar rush, boys. Because the crash is coming. And when the crash arrives, none of the accounts you're currently defending will be around to catch you. Alright, let me pull it back down for a second, because I do not want this to spiral into a lecture. I want to hear from you. I want to hear from every single one of you in the comments below. Tell me what you think about DJ Carisma finally saying out loud what a lot of us have suspected for years. Tell me if you think the mandatory playlist system is fair, or if you think it is quietly destroying independent artists in every major city. Tell me if you think YG deserved that Verzuz win, or if you think the game got shortchanged. Tell me if you think the streamers who pulled up to Kendrick Lamar's house should be facing legal consequences, and if so, what those consequences should look like. And tell me, honestly, what you think happens next. Does Kendrick Lamar respond? Does Drake respond? Does the machine keep running, or does the machine finally start to break? Because I am telling you, from where I am sitting, watching all three of these stories land in the same weekend feels like a leading indicator. It feels like a turning point. It feels like the moment where the audience stops accepting the marketed version of reality and starts trusting their own eyes instead. And when the audience stops accepting the marketed version of reality, that is when the whole board flips. That is when catalogs get reevaluated. That is when careers get recontextualized. That is when the culture takes back the steering wheel. And when the culture takes back the steering wheel, it does not give it back. So while everyone is running around defending the Drizzy machine, while the Drizzy Deacons are filming themselves on porches, while the Owl cult is trying to bury this whole conversation under 1,000 engagement posts, I want you to remember one thing. Every empire that ever fell because the people at the bottom got tired first. The generals never see it coming. The kings never see it coming. The commercials never see it coming. It is always the workers, the DJs, the fans on the ground, who quietly stop believing. And once they stop believing, no amount of promotional infrastructure can put the story back together. That is the real headline this week. Not the porch. Not the Verzuz. Not the playlist. It is the belief. The belief is cracking. And I have not seen it crack like this in a long, long time. Now listen, I know this was a heavy one. I know we covered a lot. And I really, really appreciate every single one of you who made it to this point in the video. If you made it here, you are officially locked in with the channel, and that means more to me than you can imagine. If you have not smashed that like button already, please do it now. It costs you nothing and it does absolute wonders for the algorithm. And if you are not subscribed yet, come on, get in here. We are doing this multiple times a week, and I promise the next one is going to be just as wild as this one. Also, a massive, massive shout out to everybody who has been joining the channel memberships. It is a small gesture, but a huge lift for what we are building over here, and I never take it for granted. Same energy to everybody sending super thanks in the live chats and under the videos. I read every single one, and I am truly humbled by the love. If you want to keep the conversation going after the video ends, come find me on X. The handle is pinned in the comments and dropped in the description below. That is the fastest place to send me a video, a clip, a screenshot, a story, or a hot take you want covered on the channel, and I promise I look at every single message that comes in, even when I cannot respond to all of them. Before I let you go, one last thing. Keep your eyes open this week. Because if the pattern I just laid out for you is correct, and I believe it is, there is going to be another shoe dropping in the next 7 days. Maybe it is another DJ telling the truth. Maybe it is another fan crashing out on tape. Maybe it is Kendrick Lamar himself finally breaking the silence with a bar, a post, a photo, or an appearance that puts a period on this entire chapter. Something is coming. I can feel it. And when it hits, we will be right back here, in this exact spot, breaking it down together the way we always do. Alright, that is it for me today. Thank you again for spending part of your weekend with me. Go touch grass. Go call your people. Go drink some water. And if you happen to see a suspicious group of streamers pulling up to a house in your neighborhood pretending to be DoorDash, please, for the love of God, mind your own business, close your blinds, and let Ring handle it. Peace, love, respect to Kendrick Lamar and every artist quietly building on real merit, and I will see every single one of you in the next video. Stay safe out there. And whatever you do this week, do not let anybody in any comment section on any platform convince you that what you saw on that porch was normal, that what DJ Carisma described was fair, or that what happened on that Verzuz stage was an accident. Trust your own eyes. Trust your own ears. Trust the pattern. The pattern is the whole story.